Sol 19. How does it look? Beth asked, sidling up to where Mark was peering into a microscope. Looks like a single-celled organism dance party, he said, looking up from the scope with a pleased smile. Go ahead, take a look. She did as he said and peered through the eyepieces at the slide of dirt that he had prepared. Sure enough, there were little microbes moving around on the glass. She was certain that what she was looking at was more meaningful to Mark than it was to her, since biology was not really her forte. But if he was excited, then she was excited. Well, would you look at them go, she said with a grin, moving away from the microscope and letting Mark resume his position. It's better than I expected actually, he said happily, as he replaced that slide with another sample taken from another place on the ground. I was going to give it a couple more days, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and do the first dirt doubling today. Then I'm going to take a little corner and get the potatoes in the ground to seed. I would rather wait and do one more doubling and have more soil to work with before planting, but I think it's more important to get them in the ground now, even if means having to do an extra doubling later. What do you think? Awesome, and I trust your judgment, Beth told him sincerely. Being ahead of schedule for Operation Tater Triumph was nothing but a good thing. And while you're doing that, my plan for the day is to go outside and get the solar farm cleaned off. It's been a couple days since we've done it. You just don't want to be in here when I open the waste box, he smirked knowingly, talking about the container half full of wet dirt they had been dumping their crap into for the last 5 days. Before Mark doubled the dirt, he would use that to fertilize the new dirt to really give the bacteria something to grow in. Abso-fucking-lutely, she confirmed shamelessly. Although the panels really should be cleared off today. Having enough power is the one problem we don't have. I'd like to keep it that way. Venkat Kapoor's office, Johnson Space Center, Houston, Texas. You've got nothing. Venkat groaned, leaning back in his desk chair. So you're telling me that Johansson managed to send us a message with a 30-year-old satellite, a pile of rocks, and whatever spare parts she could cobble together, but we can't send her a message back with 20 experts working round the clock for 3 days with a multi-billion-dollar communications network at their disposal? Yes sir, Chuck confirmed, fidgeting where he stood in front of the director of Mars missions. That's correct. We don't even know how she managed to communicate with the MRO to hack it, Morris added. She shouldn't have a transmitter strong enough. Not without a working comm dish. And without a dish we can't send a message back, Chuck continued. We've got the entire SETI network focused on Mars today. To see if she's sending anything else out. But it's been a couple hours and so far no dice, Morris picked up. Whatever it was she was using to communicate with the MRO isn't broadcasting anymore. Will someone please explain to me how a single windstorm removed our ability to talk to us three? Venkat said, pinching the bridge of his nose. Failure of imagination, Chuck said simply. Totally didn't see it coming, Morris agreed. Venkat opened his mouth to speak again, but was interrupted by the ringing of his phone on his desk. Kapoor, he answered brusquely. Yes, Miss Park, what can I do for you today? He dismissed the two scientists with a wave of his hand. Chuck and Morris, who were all too eager to be out of their boss's office, quickly fled before he asked any more questions that they only had bad news to answer with. She did. Venkat exclaimed, sitting straight up in his chair. When? She's still outside. I'll be right down, he said quickly, already sliding his arms back into his suit jacket. Sol 20. I wish we had popcorn, Mark mused as halfway through another episode of Scrubs that they'd stolen off of Beck's personal drive. Beth hummed in agreement. With extra butter. They were relaxing in front of the biggest screen in the hub as they watched. Mark was completely stretched out with his socked feet propped up the edge of the desk, his arms crossed lazily over his chest, while Beth resembled an egg with a head, her legs tucked up into her sweatshirt and her arms banded tight around her knees. The really terrible movie theater kind, that's really just butter-flavored oil, he continued. And super salty too, she added. None of that kettle corn crap. You don't like kettle corn? He asked, surprised. No, not at all, she replied, her nose scrunched up. Popcorn is supposed to be salty, not sweet. If I want sweet, I'll have candy. What about Cracker Jacks? Are you going to turn this into a baseball thing? She asked warily, one eyebrow arched, knowing how seriously he took his cubs. Mark opened his mouth to reply, but was distracted when a gust of wind made the canvas of the hab ripple over their heads. They glanced at each other for half a moment before Beth extricated herself from her sweatshirt cocoon and grabbed the laptop she had left on her bunk. There was only one weather station left completely intact after her booster project, and they had moved it so it sat right outside the hab. It wasn't doing them any good a kilometer out since they couldn't communicate with it, but after hardlining it to the hab's systems, they could at least get limited information about the weather conditions in their direct vicinity, without having to go outside. It doesn't look bad, Mark said from where he had gotten up to look out one of the small hab windows. It's definitely kicking up some dust, but it's not even blocking out the sun that much. You're right, Beth confirmed, looking up from the data on her screen. It's only blowing 25 km per hour and gusting 35, not very much power behind it at all. No way to tell how big it is or how long it'll last, but at least it's not very strong. Mark felt his pulse, which had kicked up at the first sign of wind, start to slow back to normal. Glad to hear it, he said honestly, wandering into the other room to grab a spare blanket to wrap around his shoulders before sitting back down to continue watching TV. Several episodes later, Beth glanced at the laptop she had brought over and kept in her peripheral vision. Looks like it's just about passed, she announced after reading over the data. That was fast, Mark commented, standing to go back to the window. Yep, it's back to clear butterscotch skies out there. Yeah, it wasn't bad at all, she agreed. Of course it was just bad enough to cover the solar panels with dust after I spent several hours clearing them off yesterday, she grumbled, annoyed at Mars in general. I'll take care of it, he offered. You can hang out inside. What? Are you sure? She questioned. Yeah, I'm positive, he assured her. You've cleaned them off by yourself the last 3 times, it's my turn. I don't mind coming out to help, she offered again. I know you don't, but I've got this one, he insisted, already heading over to his Eva suit. Just don't watch any more Scrubs without me. Beth laughed. I think I'm done with TV today anyways. I think I'll just read a book while you're outside. SATCOM, Johnson Space Center, Houston, Texas. Mindy Park sat slumped low in her chair, her feet kicked out straight in front of her, snacking on some granola while she flipped through the latest imagery from Mars. Hello, Miss Park, a familiar voice sounded from right behind her. Dr. Kapoor, she exclaimed, scrambling to sit up straight while not spilling her snack. I wasn't expecting you. There hasn't been any activity outside the hab today, or I would have called you. That's fine, Mindy, Venkat said, trying to put her at ease. I was informed there was a dust storm in the Acidolia Planitia today. Yeah, she said, pushing her glasses up before pulling up the imagery. It was just a little one and it's already over. It only lasted a couple of hours, it was just enough to kick up some dust and it passed over them pretty quickly. That's good news, Venkat said as he pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. Mindy side-eyed her boss's boss warily, not sure what he was doing in SATCOM when she was sure there was about 1,000 better uses of the Director of Mars mission's time than watching her flip through dozens of images of the same exact thing. Is there something I can do for you, sir? She finally asked. Oh, Venkat said, surprised, not realizing he hadn't said why he was there. Now that the storm has passed, she or they will need to clean off the solar farm again. Oh, okay, Mindy nodded. That made sense. Except. So you're just going to wait here with me, she prodded further. I can call you if someone shows up, if you have something else you need to do. To be honest, I might also be avoiding Annie Montrose, he admitted. She wants me to do another press conference this afternoon and I don't have anything new to say since the press conference this morning. So my presence here is twofold. She won't think to look for me here and I'm hoping that we might get some new information for when she does manage to track me down. Mindy nodded knowingly. That made more sense. She had only met the Director of Media Relations in person once, and that was only a few days ago when Miss Montrose came to her to basically warn her to keep her mouth shut about what she'd found in the imagery until NASA made an official statement. Mindy had left the encounter not knowing if she was more terrified or attracted to the older woman. She was still trying to figure it out. So I take it if you're here looking for news, she said, making conversation, as she remembered her snack on her desk and poured some into her hand before wordlessly offering to share. You haven't had any luck trying to establish communication? No, thank you, he said, before pulling his glasses off to clean. Unfortunately no, without a working comm array on Mars it seems to be a dead end, he said. I still have people looking into it, but right now we need to focus on finding a viable rescue plan and figuring out a way to keep her or them alive until said rescue plan. And I guess those would be very different equations depending on if you're dealing with 1 or 2 people alive on Mars, she said, brushing the crumbs off her hand before leaning forward to open the new imagery that just came through. Exactly, he said, slipping his glasses back on his face. Which is why if Mark is alive I really need them both to leave the hab at the same time. Mindy took a moment to peer at the new photos, flipping back and forth between a couple of them. Unfortunately today is not that day, Dr. Kapoor, she said, pointing to a figure on the image. You've got someone cleaning the panels, but it's still only one person. Venkat ran a hand down his cheek as he looked at the images, slumping back in his chair. It's only been a couple days, she offered pacifyingly. It's way too soon to start making assumptions. Try telling that to the press, he countered. They don't seem to care about that. And I'm not going to be the one to tell them Watney is dead if there is any chance he might not be. I can't handle one of my astronauts coming back from the grave twice. Mindy tossed another handful of granola into her mouth. He's Schrodinger's astronaut, he mused sagely as she munched. Venkat's head slowly swiveled in her direction. What was that? I said he's Schrodinger's astronaut, she repeated. Until we look inside the hab he is both dead and not dead. When Venkat didn't immediately reply, Mindy kept talking. Until they either leave the hab at the same time, or we can contact Johansson and get confirmation that he didn't survive Sol 6, as far as we're concerned both realities exist. Schrodinger's astronaut. I suppose that's an apt analogy, Venkat said after a moment. For what it's worth, she said. I think Watney's alive. And why would you think that? He asked, honestly curious at her answer. Because of the, she lifted her arms up and shrugged, mimicking the drawing in the sand. I mean, I've never met Watney or Johansson. But from what I know of them through the media at least, that seems like the kind of thing that Watney would contribute. She shrugged again, but for real this time. Just my thoughts. Venkat considered it for a moment. Mindy did have a point, it was something that he would expect from Watney. But Johansson was a bit of a dark horse personality and humor-wise. While he had no problems believing 100% that adding an emoticon to a message like that would be something that Watney would do, he couldn't 100% say that it's something Johansson wouldn't do, and therefore couldn't take it as irrefutable evidence that Watney was still alive. You make a valid point, he conceded. Unfortunately, I'm not willing to make a definitive public statement to the world solely on the merits of Watney's terrible sense of humor. Fair enough, Mindy shrugged, turning back to the screen. They fell silent as they watched the progression of the cleaning of the solar farm through the images coming through every few minutes. Eventually the figure finished their job and re-entered the hab, and Venkat's attention drifted over to the rock message, still sharply visible, even though the emoticon had been wiped clean from the sand in the windstorm earlier that day. I wish she would change the message, he sighed. Update us on her condition. Yeah, Mindy agreed. But I get why she hasn't. However she managed to hack the MRO was obviously a Hail Mary. And she has no idea if it worked, Venkat continued her train of thought. She has no way of knowing that we received it. But she's smart enough to know that even if the MRO didn't take her reprogramming, that we'd have to take imagery of the Ars-3 site eventually, she added. Who knows how long that would have taken, he muttered to himself, knowing that Teddy with Annie's backing would have wanted to minimize the PR fallout as much as possible and wouldn't have greenlit imagery of Acidolia planitia for months, maybe even longer. Possibly too late to do anything for their marooned astronauts. Mindy just hummed lightly, to indicate she had heard him, having the feeling that he wasn't actually looking for a response. What must it be like? He continued to ponder. She's stuck out there. Even if Mark is alive with her, they think they're totally alone. That we all gave up on them and left them for dead. What kind of effect does that have on a person's psychology? He turned to look at Mindy. I mean, what are they thinking right now? Sol 21. Tucked into her bunk, blankets pulled tight beneath her chin, Beth was only moments from sleep when Mark's voice called from across the room. Hey Beth, he said in a shouted whisper. Are you still awake? Barely, she replied sleepily, not opening her eyes. What's up? Mark hesitated. Never mind, go to sleep. What is it, Mark? She asked again with a heavy sigh. If he just left it there it was going to bother her and then she'd never fall asleep. Don't worry about it, I'll ask you tomorrow. For fuck's sake, just ask your question, she said, frustration clear in her tone. How come Aquaman can control whales? What? She exclaimed, rolling over and opening her eyes. How come Aquaman can control whales? He asked again, looking back at her from across the dimly lit room. What the fuck are you talking about? She said, lifting her head to look at him. Whales are mammals, it doesn't even make sense. You don't even make sense, she retorted surly, dropping face first back down onto her pillow. Go the fuck to sleep, Mark. The hab fell into silence except for the ever-present hums of the life support systems. This time it was Mark who was almost asleep when Beth spoke. God damn it, Watney. What? He asked, not bothering to open his eyes. Why can Aquaman control whales? Suddenly wide awake again, Mark rolled over onto one elbow to face her. I mean, I understand if you're gonna say, alright, well, kids might not know that a whale is a mammal, he continued as there hadn't been a 15-minute gap in the conversation. And if Aquaman needs a big fish, the kids are gonna say, well, why didn't he call a whale? And you're not going to stop the show to explain that whales are mammals. Because the kid doesn't know the whale's a fucking mammal. I hate you so much sometimes, Beth said dryly. You love me, Mark countered with a shit-eating grin. Whatever. She pulled the blankets up over her head. I'm going to sleep. Beth did not go to sleep. But Mark did, which is why she was throwing an empty plastic bottle across the room at him 45 minutes later. What the hell? He asked groggily when said bottle bounced off his forehead. I figured it out. Figured what out? He asked, confused, already half back to sleep. Why Aquaman can control whales, she announced. Are you serious right now? He's Aquaman, not Fishman, she explained. It's so obvious it's stupid I didn't realize it right away. My only excuse is that I've always been a Marvel girl, not a DC girl. Anyways, he can telepathically control anything that has aquatic evolution. So that would include marine mammals, aquatic reptiles, cephalopods, as well as fish. Mark cracked an eye open to look at the time. Have you seriously been laying there this whole time thinking about this? Not the whole time, she said defensively. And it was true, a lot of it was spent trying to go back to sleep, and even longer cursing his name for putting these questions into her brain when she didn't have access to Google. Go to sleep, Johansson. You're welcome.